Hello and welcome back to the Villa podcast. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan had the amazing idea to hop on a podcast and explain to you guys how and what the UEFA Conference League actually is, because it's a new competition. Inaugural winners of Roma. Got another final coming up next week. The second Europa Conference League final ever is happening next week. But Dan and I thought, I said, I can't take any credit for this. Dan suggested that we come on here and give our best explanation of what this is, how it works, and what it means for Aston Villa now we're in this competition. We've spent the day almost researching this, making sure that we've got this as accurate as possible. So without further ado, Dan, this is complicated. So you could understand why people have struggled with this.
Yeah, well, I just saw, I've seen a lot of people online, hey, when do we come in? And I think there's, been a bit of a realization that we've not actually qualified for the tournament yet. There's obviously a playoff involved as well. And there's, obviously, as it is with a lot of knockout tournaments, there's different series of playoffs and rounds. And when the Villa come in is different. And I mean, as I said on the post-match after the Brighton game, the competition gets going. The first round is on the 20th of June. So less than sort of 3 weeks ago as we sit here recording. But Villa will come in sort of a couple of months later. So we haven't got to worry about our season starting just yet, guys. But it just goes to show, this competition is massive. I'm a massive fan of it. I think it's been a great addition. There's a lot of confusion about when the games are, all sorts. So I thought, this is a good for you. I don't want to sit here and say that you and I are experts either, mates, because I guarantee that we both learned things that we perhaps didn't know about the competition going through this process. So for you, for myself, for everybody watching, it's a bit of a dummy's guide, I think, on the UEFA Europa Conference League, because we're going to be quite familiar with this competition by this time next year, hopefully, mate.
Hopefully we're winners, mate. Hopefully
yes.
We are approaching this time now where it's West Ham versus Fiorentina, and we're getting ready to go to Athens. But it's been actually quite sobering. I don't know about you, mate, researching this, because we were all giddy yesterday and we were all saying Villa Juventus final, but there's Champions League teams that get thrown in the mix. There's Europa League teams that get thrown into the mix. It's like an onion, the Europa Conference League. It's got many layers, and we're going to try and peel them back. Interestingly, over 170 teams will be involved over the course of the whole competition. That's a lot. So again, that includes teams like us who have qualified for the qualifying rounds of the Europa Conference League. That includes Champions League teams and Europa League teams that also then fall into the competition. This feels very Dwight Schrute, doesn't it, mate? It's assistant to the regional manager. It's so extra, but it's important to caveat that, because obviously, as I say, yesterday, Dan and I got very excited about potential easy route to the final with maybe hard games against Frankfurt on the way and Fenerbahce. But obviously, Champions League teams and Europa League teams can, in fact, drop into this competition. They will be, obviously, the weaker teams, because they're going to be teams that don't advance through to the knockout rounds of the Champions League. But I think what makes this even more complicated, mate, is you have your initial playoff rounds where there are 3 rounds of playoffs before Villa currently enter the final round of playoffs. And that's just to secure a spot in the group stages. So everybody who is qualified is not actually in the group stages just yet, are they, mate?
No, it's all very interesting, mate. So there are, as I sort of alluded to, there are 3 qualifying rounds before a playoff round, which is split sort of, and different teams get dropped in at different points. Villa have qualified for the final playoff round, which I believe is at the beginning of August. And so every team has to qualify, as you say, that nobody is dropped straight in. Everybody has to qualify for the group stage. So don't worry, it's not like the Villa have been dealt a bad hand here, or like we're having to play catch up or play more games than anyone else. Everybody has to qualify for this competition. And it's interesting because you look at some of the teams that are coming in from around Europe, and the big name, as you've alluded to, is Juve, mate, who, because of the points deductions they've received over the course of the year, have dropped into 7th in Serie A. And what that means is, first of all, I don't think that's a good thing for the competition. Like, that's not why this competition was created. It's created to give sides like who don't get the chance to play in Europe very easily, who, you know, we've seen like in Europe's top 5, I believe, because that top 6 is really hard to crack at times. And so it's given this extra layer of teams an opportunity to go and play on the continent. And obviously we're one such side that's benefited from that. Had Juve not received that deduction, it would be Roma who would be sat in 7th, which is, you know, obviously as a side that have won the competition. It's interesting sort of to talk about Roma's success story as well, is that I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Roma or Feyenoord, who contested the inaugural Conference League final, neither of them were in the competition to begin with. I think both of them fell into the Conference League from the Europa League or from the Champions League. And so that goes to show that you can get all the way to this showpiece event, and between two sides that you never even thought would be competing against each other in that competition. It's quite amazing how it works. And so you sort of have to take, when you're looking at the pots and seeds that are doing the rounds on Twitter, the predicted sets, you kind of have to take that with a pinch of salt, because we've already seen that you can have a final between two teams that you never even thought would be in it. That is a sort of slight caveat. You've got the West Ham Fiorentina game as well. Obviously, West Ham qualified for the competition and have progressed all the way through. So, you know, they've been a slight change in that. But yeah, it just goes to show that, like, when you're looking at these groups and everything like that, which is an interesting setup in itself and maybe a good segue there, is because there are 8 groups of 4 teams. And for the quick mathematicians around you, you'll realize that that doesn't add up going into a round of 16. So the 8 group winners automatically go through to that round of 16. But then there's an additional knockout round for everybody that finished runners-up. And the third ranked teams from the Europa League as well that you mentioned drop in. They play an additional playoff round. So you have to play off then, should you finish second. If we speak about this in Villa terms, if Villa finish second in their group, we have to play an additional knockout round to play in to the round of 16. And that's when you sort of have these little nuggets that make the Conference League different to the Europa League, which I think people are a bit more familiar with because it follows a very similar structure to the Champions League.
It's so extra. It makes it interesting, though. And I think the other side to it is obviously that it's almost a safety net for some of the bigger teams that may struggle in the other European competitions as well. Obviously, we know we've had for the longest time Champions League clubs going into the Europa League. I mean, we had it with Manchester United this season, didn't we, Dan? Yeah. They obviously fell into the Europa League and felt very disappointed about it, but it presents a new interesting challenge. And, you know, the way some of the things are sort of phrased, you've got before the group stage, there are obviously the 3 qualifying rounds, as you say, mate. There's the main path, and then there's the Champions path, which are people who've dropped in from the Champions and Europa League qualifying. So there's literally no guarantees with this competition. Is essentially the shorthand version of how the Europa Conference League works. Nothing is guaranteed, and there's been a lot of talk, as you alluded to, mate, about being seeded or unseeded. As it stands currently, this is all dependent on whether Sevilla qualify for the Conference League or for the Europa League, which also depends on a few things. So Sevilla currently sit 11th in La Liga, Dan. They're on 49 points, and Osasuna occupy 7th spot, which is the Conference League qualifying spot. Between them, there is a point. So there's a whole bunch of teams that can potentially qualify for the Conference League spot there. Interestingly, though, I believe it is Osasuna. They play against Girona, who are one of the teams that are in the mix.
Yep.
A draw or a win for either side keeps Sevilla, well, a win for either side keeps Sevilla out of 7th. A draw and a Sevilla loss or Sevilla draw also keeps Sevilla out of 7th spot. And they play Real Sociedad, who currently sit 4th in La Liga, qualified for the Champions League. Very good team, very good season. So it's going to be quite difficult for them, isn't it, Dan? You actually watched Sevilla in the summer, didn't you, mate?
Yes.
You've seen them in the flesh. I was very jealous because you got to see Isco, one of my favourite players, before he got released. And a whole host of Papu Gomez, so many players. It's not an impossible task for Sevilla to win this game.
Yep.
But as you'll have seen, mate, nothing. As I say, nothing is guaranteed. However, there's a high chance that Sociedad win this game, isn't there?
Yeah, there's all sorts going, mate. Like, honestly, like now that the Premier League is done and dusted, if you're looking for some entertainment left in the football season, the race for that final Europa Conference League spot in Spain is heating up. There's like 4 teams that can jump in there, as you say. Osasuna are in there as well. Athletic Club are in at 8. Girona, Vallecano, and Sevilla. You've got like 5 teams going for one spot. It's going to be a whole lot of fun, especially with some of them playing against each other. I love. I've got a real soft spot for Osasuna. I'd love for them to make it, but as you say, like you sort of hope that Sevilla don't end up qualifying because their record in European competitions is just fantastic. Obviously, that mainly goes with the Europa League. Obviously, one of their successes is owed to our manager Unai Emery. And so you sort of hope that maybe one of those other sides, but that's why this competition is in there, is to give, guys like Osasuna a shout at European football. And Osasuna are a massive club. They're I don't think people really appreciate like how big they are, like 50,000 seat stadium. They're a huge club, so I'd love for them to get in there. But yeah, and I think that's the story of the Europa League, really, and that's why it's here. That's why it's brilliant. It gives more countries as well, so you get like when you look at, I think, the Welsh League and the Scottish League, like these smaller leagues get like 2 or 3, if I'm not mistaken, spots qualify for different qualification rounds of the Conference League, and that's what it's about. But occasionally you do get these giants slipping in, maybe even the group stage or coming in later on. So yeah, it will all be sort of done and dusted in about a week's time, and we'll have a better idea of how it's going to work. But there's still so many moving parts, and that's never really going to change. When we talk about the Europa League teams coming in and Champions League teams, there isn't really ever a point until you're in the round of 16 that everything is set. And you have exactly who's going to come in and exactly who you're playing against, because until that point, sort of until you get to the new year, really, you're not going to know who you're going to be playing against, when it's coming in. It's a whole bunch of fun, and there's still so much to play for and still much like to play in, and I think for the Villa, when you look at, I think West Ham's group are really interesting. And like when you look at their route to the final, it makes for, they did really well in the group stage. And this is why I sort of think it's a good thing for Villa that we've qualified for this competition, because obviously West Ham have been struggling in the Premier League this season. But in their group stage of the Conference League, they flew through 6 games played, 6 wins, 13 scored, 4 conceded, 18 points. Job done. They had Steaua Bucharest, Silkeborg, and Anderlecht in their group. So, like, not an easy group by any stretch of the imagination, but they did so well in that. And that's what I think is good for Villa, because I think when you look at guys like Cameron Archer, Aaron Ramsey, etc., if you can get yourself into a comfortable position in the group early on, then I think those guys can kind of play a role. Whereas I think in the Europa League, it's a bit more of a test. So that's why I think this is a good competition for the Villa, because we're going to have the chance to play against some great teams. Some teams maybe from competitions, that teams above us had qualified for. But also you get a real mix of I think it allows for a bit more leniency with the players that you play in some games.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of it, really, isn't it, mate? And the thing is as well, there is obviously still one more spinning plate to contest with, which is the Europa League final. Because in that we have Sevilla. So if they miss out through league qualification, Sevilla are still guaranteed European football in some form. a loss would put them in the Conference League, but a win would put them in the Europa League. And obviously, the effect that would then do the same is the same vice versa with Roma. So it's really, there's so much on these final two games for Sevilla and Roma as well, and the ramifications that Europa League qualification would have on the Serie A table as well. Who sits below Roma in eighth, Dan? I should have had this up, because obviously then the Conference League position would default to them.
So you have Torino. So it's Roma in sixth, Juve seventh, Torino in eighth.
There we go. So if Roma win that, then that's who would potentially find their way into a European competition as well. So it's I appreciate there's a lot of information for you guys to take in here, and we've done our very best to try and get this as accurate as possible. But as Dan literally just said, nothing is said and done until the round of 16. That is when you can figure out a definitive path. That is when, the only thing that you're guessing are scores and who goes through and all this kind of stuff. But obviously, in the literal sense, it's a 50-50. So it's going to be really interesting. And I am so giddy and excited about the possibility of being in this competition, because you referenced West Ham's group there, mate. They've actually had a really easy route to the final.
Yep.
They've managed to avoid a lot of the bigger teams, mainly because they qualified seeded and then all of this stuff. So there's a real impetus on just being as consistent as possible. And if West Ham can do it with the turbulent season they've had, only ensuring survival 3 weeks ago, it makes me feel pretty confident about this, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. So they had those three teams that I mentioned earlier in the group stage. They then had, and this is where the great away days come in, they had Larnaca out in Cyprus, who they beat 6-0 on aggregate. They then had Ghent, who they drew away 1-1 with before beating 4-1 at home, before the semi-final against AZ Alkmaar, who are actually a really good team, and it looks like might be in pot one for the Europa Conference League next season. They've had a really, really good season out in the Eredivisie. So they've had them in a semi-final. That wasn't necessarily easy. They had that obviously quite infamous now 1-0 win away with all that trouble that went on in the stands that put them through into a final against Fiorentina. So there's a lot of fun to be had there. And it just goes to show, as you say, mate, the benefit of not only being seeded for the competition, but also topping the group as well, and the benefit that they've had. And the real joy that sort of is in all of this, as you alluded to, is that you're not just, Villa, when we get into this competition, we have to keep one eye on the Europa League as well, because you have those teams that can drop in, that finish third in their groups, that fall into the competition. So you're affected by this competition, which feels totally separate, but is so intrinsically linked. And the chaos of it all is that, and I have seen some confusion about this, so just to clarify, both the Conference League and the Europa League are played on Thursday nights. So you've got these two separate competitions which are linked intrinsically, that play at exactly the same times midweek. It's absolutely chaos, and it's going to be so much fun to be involved in. Spans pretty much the entire continent, as I said. The reason why this is put in is to give more teams from more countries the chance to play on the continent. So it stretches far and wide. You've got so many games, particularly in the group stage, so many games going on at the same time, all of which affect each other. There's going to be so many moving parts. It's going to be one where you and I will have to be on our toes to make sure we're on top of this, mate. But it's great, and like I say, it's one where I feel like hopefully that distills some of the confusion, because there has been a bit. But that's the charm of the competition, is that confusion is what makes it so exciting, and what makes it such a rewarding competition to play in. And as you say, until the round of 16, nothing is set. And whilst that is going to be a bit of a headache, and you got to watch two competitions sort of simultaneously, it's going to be a whole lot of fun, man.
What's great about the Europa Conference League as well is you have 4:30 games in UK time. Then that is obviously not great for some reasons, in terms of like getting off work and getting to the ground and all this kind of stuff. That is obviously like a logistical nightmare, right, for a home game or whatever. But for me, selfishly, as somebody who works in sport, you get the palate cleanser 4:30 game in the Conference League to really kick off your Thursday. And boy, I mean, I work the night, so Europa League, Europa Conference League, I've been watching it all, mate. But we're gonna have to pay an even closer eye to it. So it's just amazing that we're going to be a part of it, isn't it, mate? Honestly, I'm so gassed. I'm so gassed. And obviously, there's I think it's really great for just like the sort of sporting merit. I kind of mentioned it in the other podcast that we did, the immediate sort of reaction in that, in years gone by, the Champions League was dominated by these Eastern European teams who've sort of been sort of pushed to the side over the past 30, 40 years as the investment has really been in Western Europe. So there are some huge clubs in there, some amazing cities, and I can't wait to hopefully be a part of that journey. And we're certainly going to be on that journey with you guys here at the Villa Filler. So you are going to want to make sure you subscribe to us. The growth has been crazy, guys. You guys are just TikTok. You guys are absolutely killing it on TikTok. I think we've gained like 300 followers since yesterday. Absolutely nutty. So we want to thank you guys for all your support. The hard work doesn't stop now. The season may be over, but this is when Dan and I really kick our asses and transfer content, all this stuff. We've got it coming to you in an abundance, so don't you worry. But make sure you show Instagram the same love as you show on TikTok, guys. It's at Villa Filler Pod on Instagram. That's going a bit slower. We could do with that picking up the pace a little bit. And if anybody knows of any sponsors who wants to send Dan and I out to Azerbaijan or Uzbekistan or wherever we might be on a Thursday, please, I beg you, get in touch. Get in touch. We will do almost anything. I'm speaking on Dan's path there, but we will do almost anything. So yeah, if you're new, make sure you subscribe, hit a like, and comment your thoughts below. Let us know how you're feeling about this. If we have hopefully managed to provide a bit more clarity in terms of the understanding. Again, we're still not 100%, but after getting our heads down into it, it seems there is an idea in my head of how this works. So hopefully you guys get that as well. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and up the Villa.